The moment is here, you can stop your search. It's Comics by Perch.
Hey everybody, it's Perch, and here's a relatively short email. It says, "Dear Perch, do you think that comic book characters should have sex more in the comics?" And that's it. That's the entire mail. It's like one sentence. I appreciate that. Again, there's a guy, I need to read his mail. He wrote over the course of, I think, many weeks or months, like a 5-page odyssey of a question. And it's a really good one. So it's a really great way of looking at comics. I just, I don't want to read that thing while I'm driving around in the car because it feels like it'd be mildly dangerous. But anyway, should the characters have sex in the comics? Well, the short answer is no. They shouldn't. Because, and I know some of you are going to disagree with this, but I'm curious to hear your perspective on it. Comic book characters and comic books in general, I understand they're for all ages, but unless a comic book is like Watchmen or something like that, comic books are made for a more generic audience, meaning kids, meaning people who are, not grown-up perverts. Comic books are not just made for Sanji, they're made for everyone. And if you look at like the Dark Phoenix saga way back in the day with Chris Claremont and John Byrne. So if you look at that comic, it's more or less made for kids. Now, granted, part of that Dark Phoenix saga arc includes the X-Men going to what is clearly some kind of weird sex club. Like, the White Queen and other characters are running around their underwear. Why are they doing that? Oh, it's just an evil villain organization. I always liked how Claremont with the Hellfire Club kind of dodged the super obvious. But they're clearly having orgies in that thing. It's like, no, a bunch of very attractive white people are, going to this New York club, and they're hanging out there in their underwear, and they're, they're just drinking, they're having a cocktail in their underwear, and they're talking like, "Ooh, we are all evil," hanging out in our underwear and drinking cocktails. Nothing dodgy. Let's be honest. Emma Frost, the White Queen, she's fucked out all those people, including Pierce and his weirdo cybernetic dick. She has mowed her way through the entire Hellfire Club, including Celine. Like, right? I mean, come on. When you first read that comic, if I was a kid when I read that, I'm like, why are these characters running around their underwear? When I read it years later, it was like, well, this is an eyes wide shut kind of scenario. They're clearly all having sex with each other, but regardless, this was the X-Men in the early times. But even though that was going on in the little bit of the Hellfire Club, the comics are written semi for kids. Not for kids like, Alf made a guest appearance in the comic. He was over in the Star Universe from Marvel. But, they were still made more or less for kids. So, generally speaking, what's kind of weird about comics today is that you've got these articles like, hey, did you know Gwenpool came out as asexual in the comics? And then Jeremy Whitley and all these, like Alana Smith is like, I am also asexual. No, it's you're not just nobody wants to have sex with you. That's different from being asexual. I shouldn't have. Yeah, that's probably offensive to say, but yeah, but regardless, the if you really take it to its conclusion, look, if you're reading comics through the 80s and the 90s, all the characters are asexual. Nobody wanted to think about any of these characters having sex. I mean, the idea that wasn't the point. When Cyclops and Maddie had a baby, everybody's like, wow, how'd that happen? Well, they fucked. That's how that happened. But you don't need, those panels are not in the comic. You don't need to have the romance that would go on as like Scott Summers and Maddie Pryor, they're cuddling and they're like, oh my God, Slim, you're pretty. Randy today, and Slim's like, I better keep my visors on so I don't roast your skull into a flaming molten bit of fleshy goo. And she's like, you say the sexiest things. And it's like, that was the subplot. And then the comic would go like, meanwhile, in Japan, Wolverine's fighting the fucking Silver Samurai again. Like that, like comics didn't go through this. And so it's a little weird in current comics where it's like, Gwenpool discovers she's asexual. No, she doesn't. All the characters are this way. I mean, Captain America, I mean, even though they had him with Bernie and kind of, that he was slipping the old, American snake to Diamondback during that whole storyline, the Mark Grunwald run. But they didn't go into detail with that. You didn't have like a whole issue of Captain America like buying condoms. You would today, but if you don't have that back then, all the characters were more or less like you kind of got a vague sense like Captain America was probably fucking somebody, but they didn't put that in the comic. For all intents and purposes, these characters are all asexual. I would argue that every character in the 70s and 80s, with maybe the exception of Reed and Sue, who produced Franklin, all the characters are more or less sexless because the comics were not obsessed with that. You didn't need like if the characters are gay, straight, asexual, bisexual, two-spirit, like nobody really gave a shit about any of that. Characters are just that, like, the purpose of comics is you open it up, it's like, fuck, Wolverine's fighting the Brood. Not, Wolverine's gay every fourth day when he considers what it'd be like to, live it up with Hercules. He didn't have those storylines because nobody cared. It wasn't the point of the comics. And somehow in the last like 5 to 10 years, the comic, like the writers, like we really need to identify who these characters are fucking when they're not fighting Orcus or Hydra or Kraven the Hunter or whatever else is going on. We need to really focus on that. Isn't it weird, by the way, if you read comics in the 80s and 90s, Peter Parker was married to Mary Jane. Like married. Meaning, after that wedding, the one where they had the special cover, you could buy the one where it's Peter Parker, you buy the one where it's Spider-Man. That was a big deal. There's like 2 covers. And Mary Jane had this dress, and if you read that comic, they're like, Mary Jane's dress was designed by a famous fashion designer who was designing. Like, there's a whole backstory, and the people reading the cover go, I don't give a shit. Is Spider-Man going to fight Doc Ock in this on his way to the wedding? I mean, whatever. But anyway, so at the conclusion of that comic, Peter Parker, Spider-Man, like swung Mary Jane back to the apartment and then just fucked the shit out of her. Like they consummated the hell out of that marriage. They did that, but it wasn't in the comic. And whenever they would have like Peter Parker fooling around with Mary Jane, it'd be like Peter Parker was like, I'm going to tickle you. By the way, this isn't me joking around. If you actually read those issues, including the ones like Todd McFarlane did, like Peter and Mary Jane would be like walking around and Peter's like, you clearly know in the comic that Peter is horny, but he's like, oh, we're going to have a tickle fight. And Mary Jane's like, oh, no, you don't, Peter Parker. And like, she's in her underwear. Like, don't I look sexy, Peter? And Peter's like, I'm going to tickle you. And then like, meanwhile, across Manhattan, Kraven the Hunter is like coming out of a coffin somewhere like, I must hunt the spider. And then they would like come back and like Peter and Mary Jane are drinking coffee. Like, well, a good thing we're drinking coffee and having a good time. Mary Jane has this smoking addiction that we should really make sure she's not smoking cigarettes because that would be bad for her health. And then suddenly, like Kraven would throw a spear through a window and then would be off the act. They didn't acknowledge, like, you never had a comic during that period where Peter Parker was like, oh man, I had the best orgasm in my life. But I think Mary Jane might have been faking it. I don't know. We're going to have to try this a couple more times and see what happens. And I don't know, should I pull out or not? Because I might have radioactive sperm and it would cause major problems. And like, you never got any of that because the comics were written for both adults and kids. And the writers at the time were not perverts who thought, I really need to explain what happens when Peter Parker and fully nuts in Mary Jane. Or, like I need to fully be able to have some deep descriptions and panels in the comic that defines this. You don't need that. By and large, the majority of people who are reading superhero comics are not reading those comics because they want the characters to fuck, whether they're straight or gay or bisexual or whatever they happen to be. They're reading the comics because they want to see Spider-Man punch Doc Ock in the face. They want Batman to figure out how to stop the Joker when he's poisoned the Gotham water supply. That's why they're reading the comic. They're not reading the comic to go, I wonder if Catwoman ever ties up Batman with her, with her whip and then forces him to, like take off the mask and put the Batarang up his butt. Nobody wonders about that. This isn't something that happens in the comics. Mark Miller wonders about that every now and then. When you're reading his comics, like he will answer those questions. Right now, if Mark Miller's deal with Netflix comes to an end, and then let's say he comes back to Marvel, and they put him on Fantastic Four, there is a 100% chance Mark Miller will finally answer the question: does Reed Richards stretch his penis to make it super pleasurable for Sue? All the other writers we don't want to go there. We're just going to have, they're going to fight like the Wizard and the Frightful Four. But Mark Miller will be like, I'm devoting a goddamn issue to solving this mystery. That's what would happen there. Anyway, no. The short answer is no. I don't want the Marvel and DC universe spending a lot of time kind of showing the characters fucking. Nobody wants that. Look, it turns out that thanks to the internet, there's all kinds of porn that you can get really, really easy through Google. I mean, you could put the word nude and any actor or actress you want to think up in your mind, and you're either going to get, actual pictures of it, or you're going to get AI generated stuff that will, leave nothing to the imagination. So I just, the comics don't need to scratch that itch. Just let them tell good superhero stories. I don't need to know, like another good example of this in Marvel is Marvel seems like they are obsessed with explaining to you if Hawkeye and the Black Widow are fucking. So whenever you see the two of them a comic together, you'll notice the writer's previously had a relationship, currently on shaky ground. And Hawkeye is like, oh, Natasha, I hope you're doing well. And Natasha's like, oh yeah, Hawkeye is still doing a good job aiming at things and hitting them and causing a reaction. And Hawkeye's like, sounds like you're coming on to me, Natasha. I mean, nobody wants to read that fucking comic. They just what they want is AIM is building some poison gas shit that's going to destroy the Mall of America, and Hawkeye and Black Widow are there, and, neither one of them really have powers, so how are these two? What good are arrows against poison gas? Well, find out. Buy this comic. That's what people want. They don't want all this other horse shit. So, there you go. That's a long-winded way of saying no. No, am I wrong, by the way? Let me know in the comments below. Are you really interested in comics about the superheroes having sex? Is that what you're into? Let me know in the comments below. Like and subscribe, of course, and thanks for listening.
I don't want it. I never have.